Folks, thank you for tuning in. Our viewers from the U.S. and Canada, and a few from around the world in increasing numbers tuning into the Stockwell Day-to-Day show. And we thank you for that as we flip through the highlights here that'll equip you for the issues of the day. Stay tuned on this show. You're going to see some amazing poll results on some pretty big questions, and also what's happening in terms of Gen Z fashion. But let's jump right away to what happened last night, continuing today in Belfast, Ireland, where we see yet another tragic situation. I don't know what's with all these knife stabbings, but it seems to be the weapon of choice. And an interesting arrest and a heartbreaking situation. A gentleman by the name, and I use the word gentleman very, very casually here, Hadi Alodid. He's 30 years old and been arrested and charged with the knife stabbing of Stephen Ogilvie. This happened in Belfast. Again, this is a case of an immigrant who was applying for asylum status, and he'd been allowed to stay in the country for quite a while, and for reasons we don't know, he almost killed this guy, stabbing some people intervened. Obviously, some standby people jumped and held him down till he was arrested. And then during the night, there were groups of masked men calling themselves Irish, and no doubt that they were going to the homes of some people who are identified as immigrants and lighting them on fire. Terrible situation. Let me say a couple things off the top. It doesn't matter how awful these stabbings are, awful and tragic and shouldn't be happening, but the response is not for citizens to go around and burning down the homes of immigrants, many who are immigrants who've lived in the country for many, many years and are fine citizens. This is all getting out of hand. It goes along the line of similar mass disruptions and violence relative to the Henry Nowak case. And if you remember, that was causing, in London last week, widespread violence. Henry Nowak, who was a white young teen, and stabbed to death by Vikram Digwa. And in that situation, as you remember, the police actually put Henry Nowak in handcuffs while he was bleeding to death, and Vikram Digwa was able to walk away. So terrible situation there. Another stabbing, similar one in Austria. So, we really need to get to the bottom, first of all, of what can you do to reduce this immediate thing. What's with all the stabbings? And the anger that is coming up is resulting in actually a lot of violent acts against immigrants in general. And as we know, most countries quite rightly have a policy of allowing in a certain number of legal immigrants, and it's the illegal ones and the ones who turn to violence and then appear to not have anything happen to them when they have done their violent acts, many times of killing people, that is causing increasing anger in most countries now. You see it in Canada, you see it in the US, you see it throughout Europe. And I would encourage people, if you're really upset about this, you need to ask yourself the question, why is it generally liberal, or in the United States, Democrat or left-leaning parties that first of all allow the illegal immigration to happen, and then when the illegal immigrants commit these awful deeds and awful acts of violence, the appearance is, at least to most citizens, that hardly anything happens to the perpetrators of the crime. What can you do about this? Well, I would suggest, at the risk of sounding political, stop voting for the political parties that allow massive illegal immigration, and that do not, and those same parties are the ones that appoint the judges who defy not only the constitutional law, but the will of the public, and do very little to deal with the perpetrators. So this is a political problem, and the answer is a political answer, and you have to start looking at it that way. But violence against immigrants is not the answer, folks. Please speak up and stand up against that. Otherwise, we are just as bad as the judges and as the politicians who, by their actions, seem to be wanting to allow this to happen. And why then do these governments and these particular liberally appointed judges not do anything? Well, they are afraid of losing the votes of the very immigrant communities that they allow in. I can tell you from working with many of in the immigrant community, they get as upset as anybody else does about some of this violence. So let's look at this, deal with it politically, and ask our politicians to smarten up. And quite frankly, it is not wrong to say to the judiciary, they too must smarten up and must act along the lines of the Constitution. We have in countries that work, in democracies that work, it's because there's a balance of powers. The reason there's a balance of powers is because those who constituted the roots of our democracy understood that human beings will tend to want to accumulate power for themselves. This goes with every party. There's no political party that is immune from this. And the only way you have, you keep one particular party or individual from becoming like a monarch or a dictator is you have balancing powers. So in Canada, the United States, most European countries, you've got an elected legislature. That's one area of power. That's straight democracy. Then you have what's called the executive layer. That's the cabinet or its equivalent. And then you have the judiciary. All of these are meant to keep each other in check. The judiciary is supposed to be, by original construction of most constitutions, this would be Canada, the US, and Europe, they are supposed to interpret the law as it was written and as it was intended. If they want to change the law, judges should not be doing that. Judges should step down off the bench and run for political office. They can make suggestions and maybe say the law, in their view, is faulty, and they can make a definition in terms of whether the law, in effect, is constitutional, but they are supposed to be upholding the Constitution as it was written. If there's going to be amendments to that, that's to be done by the elected people. So I say to the judges out there, quit being the ones who are promoting social change. That is up to the politicians. Then the people can decide if they want that social change by either voting for those politicians or punting them out of office. So judges, stay in your lane and don't be a part of this increasing pressure towards violence. Sorry if I get a little bit upset about that, but I simply do. And again, folks, the answer is not increased violence. So looking at what's happened overnight, an increase in activity in Iran, between Iran, of course, and the Middle East. Iran shot down an Apache helicopter, a U.S. Apache helicopter. It was seen as a miracle that the pilots survived. They survived and they were rescued. The account is that the drone that hit them, that pierced the wall of their helicopter, actually lodged, stuck right between the two pilots and didn't actually blow up. And the pilots were able to land the helicopter on water and be rescued. But Iran has also launched attacks on Bahrain, on Kuwait, and Jordan. And at the same time, we still have the U.S. President Trump saying it's just within 2 or 3 days. He thinks they're going to have an agreement of sorts with Iran. We'll wait and see if that happens. Well, as we predicted right here for the last few weeks, back in the U.S., Graham Plattner, remember, this is the guy who is running in what's called the primary. That's like the nomination for the Democrats, the Democratic Party in the state of Maine, and probably the most horrendous record of anybody to date running in political office in terms of tweets, sexual comments, everything from what he does when he's alone in a porta potty to engaging with dozens of women at a time, and just on and on and on. Anyway, he won the Democrat nomination, and this has been happening around the U.S. So the situation in the U.S., in the Senate, there are 100 seats there, 2 from every state, and the Republicans right now have 53 of those seats, so a very close majority. They can't afford to lose any seats. the Democrat Party in November must gain 4 seats to be able to get control of the Senate. So every one of these seats is very, very important. And the theme that's emerging is it doesn't matter who they elect, who the Democrat Party elects in their primaries. The main items are going to be, they keep raising anti-Israel, so-called genocide in Gaza, and going after billionaires and hitting hardworking people with higher taxes. This is sort of the common appeal. Seems to be getting traction in some areas. In South Carolina, a person who was running for governor, and her name is Nancy Mace. She was running in the primary. This is for the Republican, and she did not have the endorsement of Donald Trump, though she did when she first entered politics some years ago. She did not have his endorsement, and she wound up not winning. Matter of fact, she came in 5th place. So what's emerging here is, on the Democrat side, it seems to be a pretty good track record that Bernie Sanders, who is the lead socialist among the Democrats, he's over 80 years old, constantly railing against the U.S. and against things like freedom of enterprise. If a candidate gets his endorsement as a Democrat, they seem to have a pretty good record of winning. And on the Republican side, if a candidate gets the endorsement of Donald Trump, they have a pretty good chance of winning. You're going to see that continue to evolve. Well, in looking at the situation of falling and declining birth rates, and we talked about that 2 days ago, new studies and reports out saying that smartphones, are you ready for this? Smartphones are a significant factor when it comes to the reduction in the birth rates. And so we sort of chuckle at that, but there is some seriousness about this. Reporter Matthew Pennington over at AFP News pointing out large spread and wide-ranging studies so that birth rates are down, showing birth rates are down. Now, birth rates have been in decline for probably 50 years, we can easily say, and this would be worldwide, but dramatic decline, 22% down since 2007, at the time when iPhones were broadly being made more available and much cheaper by a number of companies, not just one or two. And they're looking at this. The report deals with this not just in U.S. and Canada. In 128 countries, they see the falling birth rates dramatically falling. And they're talking about the time. Some of the implications here are that people, especially Gen Z, are able to spend more and more time just on their phones, and the desire to be with people or to be in a relationship is being met by being on the phone. And of course, the tremendous availability, even as young as 5 and 6 years old, to highly sexualized or pornographic material, to the ability to be meeting people online and just, let's just say, acting out all their sexual fantasies live online. All of this is leading to and has led to a decrease in people, young men, young women in some cases, not feeling the need to be in a relationship, not feeling the need to raise children, and being a significant factor in the decline of birth rates. I'm going to leave that with you for your consideration. Gallup poll. Gallup has been doing polls in this one particular area of what's called behaviors. They've been doing a certain poll since 2001, and they've been measuring 20 specific behaviors. And they're finding an interesting change over the last few years in terms of, they would name these 20 behaviors, and then they would ask the people they're polling, do you approve of this behavior or that behavior, whatever it is? Gambling is one of them. And gambling, though there's a huge increase in terms of dollar numbers because it's so available on people's phones again, but it is increasingly seen as less, it gets more disapproval. This is just over the last 5 years. Cloning of animals is actually falling, continues to fall. But interesting, having a baby outside of marriage, that is falling in the approval rating. Less people, it's dropped from 67%. We're sort of okay with that, no problem. That's down to 58% now. And teen sex outside of marriage, approval rating dropping in the Gallup poll for that. Other things, for instance, the death penalty is at 52%, people saying approval. And these are some very interesting trends, and slight less approval for LGBTQ type of same-sex relationships. That is dropping. And we're seeing this just over the last 5 years, very interesting. So behavioral polls and behavior and the polling of approval for those, interesting. It seems to be, is it true that some of these behaviors, is the population becoming slightly more, let's say, small c conservative in their views? Gen Z continues to be appearing, at least, to be opting out of barroom activity for finding satisfaction, and more joining running clubs, dropping away from the bars and joining the running clubs. And we'll see if that particular trend continues. The approval of gay marriage or same-sex marriage still in a majority range. Most people approve of that. But just since 2022, so that's just over 4 years, the approval of gay marriage is dropped from 71% approval to 62% approval. That's an interesting number. Nobody's suggesting you make it illegal. They're just saying social approval for it is dropping. Well, in schools, what we're seeing, a trend, again, among Gen Z, Tanmaxxing. Now, we know that we've talked about different types of maxing. That's where, obviously, things are sort of maximized and focused on. And back to the tanning salons, even tanning pills and being out more. They say a lot of this is because a lot of the kids were raised up with parents, the Gen Z raised up with parents who were erring on the other side of caution. And you see it all the time at the swimming pools and at the beach, where these little 4-year-olds, they're clad in suits, everything from their wrists to their ankles being covered, and they've got hats pulled down over their eyes, and they've got the flowing thing at the back of the neck covering them. And as they get older, they seem to be pushing back against that. And Tanmaxxing, even with all the concerns about tanning, is definitely on the rise. Well, one thing that's not on the rise, Canada, the Bank of Canada, holding its rate at 2.5%, not increasing it. Now, the reason a federal bank, be it Canada, the United States, or in Europe, if it lowers the interest rate, the borrowing rate, then obviously more people will borrow money. And then the speculation is that leads to more spending and more inflation. Remember, the single greatest cause of inflation, this is a test for you, regular listeners and viewers, single greatest cause of inflation is government spending borrowed money. Increased government spending with borrowed money is the single greatest reason for inflation and you losing your purchasing power at the grocery store or anywhere else. There are other factors, of course, and one of the factors now, with the situation in Iran and shipping lines being disrupted and price of oil and gas edging upward, that also leads to, in the minds of the bank anyway, increased inflation. So they're holding the line on not raising or lowering the interest rates. Well, in Quebec, the our American viewers are always showing, scratch their heads with curiosity about the language laws in Quebec and how that affects advertising. In 2022, in Quebec, the French government, the Francophone government, even raised the number of restrictions about how you can advertise your business. Any sign, words in French have to be twice the size of any text of any other language, and of course has to occupy more than 50% of the sign. And there was a lot of pushback just over the last little while, because a very popular pub known as the Burgundy Pub was being told they had to change their sign, and it had to be called Bourgeois, which is the French word for that particular region, which we call Burgundy. It was getting a lot of pushback. So much pushback that actually the Language Commission in Quebec has backed off, and they told the pub, okay, you can keep Burgundy pub up there. We won't make you change it. So is that a sign that that the language police are easing off in Quebec? We don't know, but people do watch that with interest. Well, the whole problem of deep fake AI and sexualized videos, the deep fake sexualized videos with AI, this is where a person's face, the regular face, or a well-known person or even not well-known, can be taken, and then with video and with AI can be really stuck onto a body. You can't even tell the difference. And of course, deeply sexualized, and in some cases, grotesquely sexualized, violent tapes being made, videos being made, and those then being sold. Police are finally starting to crack down on that. And in Canada, Stephen Lowe from Atlanta, Canada, has been arrested. He's uploaded several thousand of these fake AIs using real faces of real women. 14 women were able to get together and bring charges. This is devastating stuff that goes on because these videos circulate widely, and people who wind up recognizing the faces, and it can be obviously devastating. So we'll see if these particular people, now that they're getting apprehended, just a few of them, the problem is still huge, are going to get significant punishment or not. It's interesting to note that X, formerly known as Twitter, that's Elon Musk's operation, and Meta have both been noted by police and authority as being helpful in terms of tracking these down. But other sites and the Tumblr, is it Tumblr or Timbler? I guess it's, I don't know, one of the two, sorry, on one of these dating sites, has not been particularly helpful. So you might, if you're in the dating business and you're using these sites, you might want to caution and say to yourself, do I want to sign on to a site that is not at all helpful to authorities in terms of these fake AIs? Well, Bill Gates, you might want to watch this today, is going to be facing congressional questioning today about his relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. So we'll see how that goes. Remember, Bill Clinton got faced with that also. Bill Gates' significant involvement, according to the files. He says he's actually never been to the island. His former wife, Melinda, had warned him not to hang out with Jeffrey. He admits to that. Anyway, we'll see what comes of his grilling before U.S. politicians today. In the Ontario Tobacco Research Unit, I talked a little bit last week about increasing use of nicotine pouches, and they've come out with more stats. In 2022, so we're talking 4 years ago, 7.6% of Gen Z, so that's 7% of all Gen Z, were using nicotine pouches. That's a fairly high number, but in 4 years, that has jumped to almost 35%. 34.8% of Gen Z are saying they are or have used. That's a huge jump in these nicotine pouches. And the reason there's no fear of it is because it's not associated with smoke itself, with cigarettes, and they think then it is harmless, but still some real problems. High addiction rate. It does cause stimulated brain activity, which is not seen in the long run as positive. And you see even some campaigns, and I will say among conservative representatives with campaigns like Free the Zyn, that's Z or ZYN. That's one of the, there's only a few products that are actually legal. That's one of them. But Premier Danielle Smith in Alberta is coming out against this. And parents, if your Gen Zs are still at home, you might want to talk to them while they're increasing their sun tanning about why they're also increasing nicotine pouches. These are not healthy, and people may want to take a look at that. Well, Prime Minister Carney had raised hopes not just in Canada, but in countries that need energy products, that need our refined oil and gas, countries like in Europe, so they don't have to depend on Putin, sending him money so that he can keep killing Ukrainians, countries even like China, looking forward to getting more of Canada's refined oil and gas products so they can reduce their dependence on coal. Countries like India looking forward to getting more of Canada's refined products so they can reduce their huge dependence on burning dung. The increased production of refined oil and gas products in Canada would lead to a reduction in emissions worldwide, of carbon emissions worldwide. But there's always been opposition to that. It's been ridiculous, projects not being allowed to go. And so you see all these many other countries which don't even have the same values as Canada producing oil and gas, when Canada could be right up there in front. So there was some optimism with Prime Minister Carney under the Liberals looking at taking a more common sense approach to that and causing projects to be able to go ahead in a more timely fashion. This also benefits the many First Nations groups along the pipeline ways who become partners in the project. And now he's announcing they're going to back off a little on what they were doing to speed up the project. Why? Well, because they're hearing from the environmental extremists who are saying, really, most of those people on the environmental extremist side say that all of that product should be just left in the ground. I guarantee you, overnight, this will start to infect investment and production, and you're going to see a slowing down of the anticipated billions of dollars of investment. Of course, the taxes for that go to our health programs and education programs. Folks, you cannot have it both ways. You can't shut down your energy production and at the same time demand that politicians give more funding to healthcare and education. It doesn't work, and simply taxing people higher does not work. And it's disappointing to see now the Prime Minister of Canada, Prime Minister Carney, signaling maybe they will back off. We'll see how that goes. Well, on a positive on the sports side, for those of you who enjoy tennis as I do and admire people like Serena Williams, who retired 4 years from tennis, she's back. As we said last week, watch for her because she's teaming up with Victoria Mboko, young tennis star from Canada, in the doubles tournaments that are taking place in London, England right now, and they won their first round. Very impressive for people like me who aren't getting any younger. Very encouraging to see some of these, what they used to call aging athletes, now being able to keep up with the 20-somethings. So pretty exciting round there. Let's see if Serena and Victoria Mboko from Canada are able to continue their run at the Queen's Club in London. Well, Vogue magazine has wanted, not just Vogue, but Vogue Online, in honor of the 250th anniversary of the United States. The founding of the United States is going to be releasing their 50 most stylish Gen Zs. They've been combing the country, and they'll be promoting the 50 most stylish Gen Zs. And two of them they've already put out there. One is Owen Peters, he's a 19-year-old guy. And when they asked him what's the secret to him looking so stylish, he talked about the prep or the preppy look, and combining that with glamour. And his three biggest influence, Jackie Onassis, that goes back a bit, antique stores, antique shops is where he likes to browse for cool clothing, and his grandma. So there you go, grandmas. And then 19-year-old Chelsea Banks from Minnesota. She's been, Vogue has said she's one of the top, and going to be in the top 50, and they're calling her fashion style as charmingly twee. Now, if you're wondering what twee is, you folks who are older than 30, it sort of means charmingly quaint, even a bit old-fashioned look, but in a charming and quaint kind of way. That's her fashion that she's bringing to the world. We'll see if that what effects this has on Gen Zs and on fashion in general as Vogue continues to unveil their top 50. Well, Pope Leo was in Barcelona, and he attended the 100th anniversary of the death of Antoni Gaudi, who, of course, is famous for the Sagrada Familia, this cathedral that's just on the edges of Barcelona. I could tell you, if you've never seen that, that's reason alone to travel to Barcelona. Barcelona is a beautiful city. My wife and I love going there. Even though I don't like the Spanish government policies, they've become extremely left-wing. That's going to bring increasing poverty to our Spanish friends. However, this was to acknowledge the finishing off of part of that cathedral. By the way, the Sagrada Familia, that cathedral, was begun by Antoni Gaudi in 1882. And it's an ongoing project, but they have finally officially finished what they call the Tower of Jesus Christ. Now, this is 566 feet high. I mean, the whole edifice, the whole architecture there is so stunningly beautiful. You just have to see it, whether you're a person of faith or not. And so the Pope attending that. It's interesting that Gaudi himself said, when they said, "Are you going to," when he was still alive, how high is it going to be? He said, "I want to make sure, yes, this will be high, but I don't want it to be higher than there's a hill in Barcelona, and a particular hill that's well revealed. It's a beautiful site. You can walk up there and it gives you a great vantage point." He said, "I don't want it higher than that particular hill, because the hill was created by God, and I don't want anybody to think I was trying to surpass God." There's a thought for the day, folks. Give me your thoughts on that. And just closing out with some of the comments that we're getting online. We got Sin Keen, if that's the correct pronunciation of the name, was appreciative of some of the highlights regarding what would have been going on in the state of Minneapolis over the last couple of years. Rob Lagarde is saying that he would move. I was commenting on people moving to Florida because of the decreased tax rates, not just because of the weather. He said he would move there if only he can afford it, but he's being taxed too high to even move. And we've got a comment from a young gentleman by the name of Isaac. And on my column there, or on the posting on the website and on my daily news, the comment on who's rocking the world, and he talks about he's just shocked by the lack of critical thinking that goes along. He's Gen Z himself, and he's a little bit surprised by that. Thanks for those comments. Keep them coming in. This is Stockwell Day-to-Day News. See you tomorrow.